As Alex said, my name is Anna Schaller, and I do head up the Tech Evangelist team for MSCA, Developer Relations in the North America region, so we are located in San Jose. Our job is to help third-party developer community integrate our public-facing SDKs into your apps, including the SDK that you see up there right now. So if you were at the Unpack event the other night, or you watched it online, or you happened to see the keynote this morning, you realize we've already released our next generation of the Gear 2. It's Gear 2 and Gear 2 Neo. From a specs perspective, it has 4 gigabytes of storage, 512 megabytes of memory. It has a 2.0 megapixel camera. There's various sensors, including accelerometer, pedometer, heart rate monitor. There is support for various video and audio formats. And the platform is Tizen-based wearable platform. So that's the hardware. From a software perspective, what you care about is how do I develop an app and get it on this gadget. So I'm timing it. Hopefully for the next 20 minutes, I'll give you what you need to know to get started with this SDK. So when you get the SDK, this is what you will get. There is a Getting Started guide in there that walks you through how to create Hello Gear. There is a sample for Hello Gear in the SDK. There's this component called SAP, Samsung Accessory Protocol. That's the communication piece between your phone and your watch. There's an API reference, and there's a developer guide, plus the library that you'll need to develop the app. There's this thing called Host or Gear Manager. As a third-party developer, you can integrate your app into the Gear Manager. There's a UI design guideline. And then there are 3 development environments. So there's support for Windows, there's support for Mac OS, and there's support for Ubuntu. When you're developing an app for the Gear, there are many, many, many moving parts. There are 2 devices. You have a phone and you have a watch. There are 2 platforms. You have Android and you have Tizen-based platform. You have 2 different application types. You've got an APK and you've got a packaged web app. So how do you seamlessly integrate all of this to create something that is completely invisible to your consumer, to your audience? Starting with the architecture, this is what your platforms look like. You've got your phone platform on the left, and you've got your wearable platform on the right. At the very foundation, it's Linux. So they both start from the same point, leveraging the same technology. When you move up the stack and get into the framework, this is where your accessory protocol framework sits, and it's on both platforms. It's exactly the same set of API calls, so you don't have to learn something new for each platform. The runtime environment on Android is Dalvik. There is a web runtime environment, a WebKit-based runtime environment on the wearable. And then the last thing I want to point out is the Gear Manager, which is very important. As a developer, you kind of need to know that this thing exists. You have to download the Gear Manager from Samsung Apps. When it's downloaded and you launch it, it will open an app that has a list of options for the consumer to use. So you can see all of the apps that are installed on your device. You can push new clock faces to your watch. You can change the way notifications work. So on an app-by-app basis, if you want to change as a consumer which apps you get notified from, you can. One of the handiest things on here is Find My Gear. I use it as a developer constantly because I need to know if my device is paired. So my device is constantly ringing with this option. So that's from a surface level. If you look behind the scenes, the Gear Manager does a whole lot more. It knows the list of apps that are installed on your watch because every app that's on your watch has to be installed through the Gear Manager. There is an APK that's bundled. It has the web app inside of it. The Gear Manager gets that APK, it locates the web app, pushes it to the watch, and the installer on the watch installs it there. By that same token, you have to delete apps through the Gear Manager as well. You cannot delete them directly from the Gear 2. So there are three application types when we're talking about these bundled Android apps. There's a standalone version that you can create. If you have an app that you want to put on the watch that doesn't require any data to be pushed from the phone, you can create a standalone app. You still have to bundle it in an Android app, in an APK, but the APK has no UI, no functionality, other than to serve as a carrier for the watch app. The second type is called integrated. If you want to create an app where you're actually pushing data back and forth, you can create an Android app, bundle in your web app, install them both, and then start the communication through SAP. But if you're like most developers, you have an app that exists already, and you don't want to have to modify it. So this is the most popular or the most common type of app. Leave your original app alone, and you're going to create a service provider that leverages the data that you're already collecting for your original app and pushes it to the gear. So if you look at this, you'll notice that the wearable is in all three of the host side apps. How does it get there? This is what your project looks like on the Android side. In the assets folder of your Android project, you drop your packaged web app. It's that simple. The other two pieces of this project that are different are the library in the libs folder, the accessory library. There's also a configuration file that goes along with it, accessoryservices.xml, that defines the connection for SAP. It's got your channel ID, it's got your transport type. With the gear, the transport type is Bluetooth, but there are other transport types available for other wearables. So if we look at SAP, this is from a 30,000-foot perspective, the calls that you need to make. You've got the provider side on the left, consumer side on the right. The point to note is you can do this from either side. Because the APIs are exactly the same, either one can be the provider or the consumer. Typically, it's the phone. So you want to call initialize. From the provider side, you then want to find that Bluetooth connection. So you want to make a call to find peer agents. You'll get a response back from that. Hopefully you're paired. Hopefully it's a positive response. And then you can make a request for a service connection. And you should get a callback on that service request. So at this point, you're paired, and you're talking between the phone and the watch. Then you can start sending data. There are different signatures for the send command. You can just send regular data. You can also send encrypted data. The other thing you have to note is close your socket connection. It's a Bluetooth socket, so close the connection before you exit your app. Two other pieces you need to know about to use SAP. I did mention the accessory services XML file on the provider side in Android. You also have to have that same file on the web app side. And you have to remember to define your permissions. You have to request Bluetooth permission. If you're going to do device discovery, you have to require Bluetooth admin permission. You have to request permission to integrate with the Gear Manager, and you have to request permission to use SAP. On the wearable side, it's one permission. It's the permission to use the accessory protocol. So this is what your packaged web app will look like. If you're an HTML5 developer, this stuff looks familiar. You've got a config file that's very similar to your Android manifest file. Defines your permissions, defines the location for your accessory services file. The index file is your web page. It's got the header and the body. You've got your style sheet. You've got your JavaScript file, which is where your logic is. You've got your additional JavaScript library folder. So we do provide a default UI framework for you, gear.ui.js. You don't have to use it, but it's there for you. And then there's the widget file, the WGT. It actually is just a zip file, so you can open it up and look inside. And then your resource directory contains your accessory services file. So this is what the UI framework provides you, the gear.ui.js. It's about 14 widgets. It does include all of jQuery, but it only exposes a subset of those widgets. It also implements some jQuery-like mobile widgets, so you get a pretty consistent look and feel. Interaction model. So when you get the device and you're using it as a consumer, you're trained to use it in a certain way. You tap the screen to launch something. You swipe panels back and forth. But the thing that you need to know about is the swipe down motion. That's your back button. There is no back button on these things. So the swipe down motion is the back event. You also have to code for that. So the good news is this is provided for you when you do a new Samsung web application. This is automatically scripted and dropped in your app. The rest of the web app is pretty standard HTML5. It is a WebKit-based environment, HTML5 using W3C standards. There is an API set for device-specific calls, for the IR LED, for instance. There's an API set for the UI, for all the widgets, and there's the industry standard API set. There is help contents, integrated help into the IDE, so if you open the help, it will provide you the programming guide to develop a web app, as well as the API, the reference. The other point here is you can include other JavaScript libraries in your web app. You can include jQuery if you want. You can include Hammer if you want. You have to watch performance. Your app will start degrading the more libraries you add and the larger those libraries are. So be very mindful of what you do add in. So development environment. The first thing you need to do, actually at some point you will need to get hardware. First thing you need to do is to make that Bluetooth connection. And then you have to use the IDEs. For this development environment, there are two. If you're an Android developer, you're already familiar with ADE on the host side. When you plug your phone in, it will show up as a device in ADT. The other development environment is for the gear. It's called Wearable IDE. When you plug your wearable in, it will show up. There's also an emulator option. This is what the IDE looks like. If you've used Eclipse, this should look like a very familiar workbench. All the views are pretty standard. The one new view is called Connection Project. That's where you launch your emulator. So you can do your web app design, your web app development, and create maybe 90% of your wearable app in the emulator. The piece that you can't do is test the connection. You do need to have a physical device in order to test the Bluetooth connection in the SAP framework. There's also a command line tool option. So with this new SDK, Gear SDK, you get this tool called SDB. If you know ADB, it's exactly like ADB. It's Smart Development Bridge is what it stands for, but it supports SDB devices to tell you whether your devices are connected on USB or not. You can open a shell through SDB, and if you do SDB help, you will get the full list of the parameters for this tool. So we've been working with early adopters for the last several weeks to get apps ready for the Unpack event. And we've noticed some things that we thought would be pretty good best practices. You probably don't want to port your Android app design to your web app on the wearable. It's different. It's got a much smaller screen, and it's got a much different interaction model. People want a quick in, quick out. They don't want to spend a whole lot of time pushing buttons on their tiny little screen. The other thing that you should know is take advantage of the swiping motion. You don't need a back button. We're trying to get app developers used to that swiping motion from top to bottom. So if you put a back button in, it's redundant. And build for offline mode. You can't launch a website from within a wearable app right now. There's no Wi-Fi connection, there's no carrier connection. So don't expect to go out to a server from your gear and get data. You still have to go through the device, through the phone. It's a companion device. So how do you get this SDK? It's coming soon. Not quite ready for prime time, but keep tabs on our developer site, developer.samsung.com, and go to Tizen's developer site. Between the two of them, the SDK will be posted. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to my boss.
Thank you, Anna. It's really great, frankly, to have Anna here. She's really good with this stuff. So, all right, my name is Hod Greeley. I am the Director of Developer Relations for MSCA in America. And I actually have the opportunity to talk to you today about something that I'm really excited about, and that is the Gear Fit. So if you've been watching for our announcements for the last couple of days, I'm sure you're familiar already with how we're expanding our family of wearable devices. So we have the Gear 2 now, and we've introduced the Gear Fit. One key piece here that I'll just highlight in this slide is the size of the Fit. Now you see that it's only 432 by 128, but one of the things that I really want to emphasize today is that despite the fact that that's not, maybe you think a lot of real estate, is I'm going to show you that with the Fit you can actually develop really substantive applications, and we're not just talking about fitness and all these other things. In fact, here, just to give you an idea from kind of user perspective, you can see a little bit of an idea of what the UI can look like on the Fit. And of course, here we're addressing the market segments that people really expect to be kind of up and coming. From the developer perspective, the one takeaway that I want to get across right now is that with the Fit, so Anna just talked about the Gear and how you can actually develop standalone applications for it. With the Fit, you actually have to have your applications work in conjunction with a host device. And we'll get into a little bit the details of that programming and what the model is, but that's just a key thing to know is that Fit right now is only going to work for applications that are linked to a host application. So, to talk a little bit about well, not talk a little bit, sorry, that was the wrong line. What I wanted to say now is we get a chance to dive into the actual SDK. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit just briefly about use cases, and you can see this animation here, and this is what I was mentioning about how you can actually do something that's a deep and substantive app. So if you watch this animation, what you're seeing here actually was a full progression toward allowing you to buy a movie ticket. And then, of course, to go with that movie ticket, you want the ability to use the ticket. So now to bring it up, and you see that's actually a pretty significant UI flow going on there, an application. So when you think Fit, this is a really beautiful form factor with this curved touchscreen capability. You can really actually build some rich applications. So let's get to talking about how you actually get started with that. And first we'll talk about a simple setup. I think I'm one behind there. All right. So simply, similar to, of course, the Gear watch device, you need to go ahead and establish your Bluetooth connection to pair the device. And then similarly, you'll also see that you get the Gear Manager and you get notifications that are very much the same as the Gear watch device. So there already you have a lot of interesting stuff going on. And as for people who saw the keynote this morning, another important factor to know when you're designing for this is that this isn't going to be, as I talked about, it requires a companion device to work with and a host application that's running on that device. So it's important to know that this is actually going to be compatible with a lot of our tablets and smartphones over 20 at launch time. Okay, so that was the fun overview part, but now I want to get into some actual technical bits. So here we're showing the overall architecture that's including the host application and what's happening on the fit. Now, what I really want to emphasize here is that what you as a developer need to be concerned about, it's nice to understand the architecture to see what's going on, but what you're really worried about is that you're developing in that sort of blue environment up there. You're actually developing an Android application using standard Android APIs, and then you'll actually use the GearFit library in order to generate your UI on the fit. And that's actually through a framework that looks pretty much like a standard Android framework. To drill down a little bit, just to illustrate that and get it into your head. So your host application is going to be built, and it's actually your host application that's driving everything. So your host application is going to be built using standard Android, and then your fit application is going to be using special calls into the fit library, which will then push things and pull things from the fit device. Right now we have 12 widgets that are available. As I said, again, to emphasize that if you look at these widgets, you actually have the kinds of things that will support a really substantive kind of application. So, for example, of course, you have things like labels, you have list boxes, but you also have nice things like the media controller, the thumbnail list box, then date pickers, and especially things like the thumbnail list box, you can see that you actually can push out graphics and things. So you're not limited to simple, line art or something like that. You can actually do some really interesting things. Now, this gives an idea, again, with the architecture that I showed you of what your workflow is going to typically be. So your workflow, again, you have your host application that must be there to actually be driving the application on the fit. So this is an example, say, where you want to pick from a contact list of somebody that you want to call. So the first thing you're going to do is actually on the host application is to load your contact list. And then you're actually going to push that contact list over to the fit device. The fit device is actually going to run that list widget that I referred to earlier. And then, of course, it's the touch sensitive, so you can actually make a selection on the fit. And you're going to get a callback on your host application about what the selection was, and then it could, for example, go ahead and dial the number for the contact that you just selected. So now let's get into, and I have not a whole lot of time, so this is actually just going to be a really brief touch onto the technical side of things. But I wanted to get across, again, fundamentally just sort of how this looks, and that it really is an Android environment that you're building in. You're building in your standard Android build environment with ADT, and actually the fit part is a standard jar file that you're going to add like you would any other extension library. And you can see here, for example, we're showing where you're simply setting up a button, and not surprisingly, you're getting an instance of a class, the SUP button control. I won't go into some of the other complexities. There's how you're kind of attaching the dialog. If you can see at the very top that we're actually in this class extending the SUP dialog class to create this initial dialog here that's showing that button. And then, of course, if somebody touches that button and you want to bring up something like the movie part, then you would go in and actually start creating the dialogue for that. And I'm not going to go deep into the code, so just to give you a flavor there, that when you get that callback, the on-click callback, which is just typical Android, you would then start to construct this new, this next step in your UI by creating a dialogue and then adding pieces to it. So that just gives you a really quick idea to give you a flavor of what developing for the fit is going to be like. Now, of course, you want to know what kind of support you have for things like testing. There's actually a really nice emulator for the Fit. This is an interesting way that this works. It's a little bit different from what you might be used to with the, say, Android emulator, in that it's actually built so that you pair it with a physical device and drive the emulator from your physical device. It will connect through Bluetooth to your PC and actually drive the emulator, the Fit emulator, on the PC. So they didn't give a whole lot of time for this talk. I wish we could talk in deeper terms. Like I said, I'm really excited about this device. I'm having fun. I get to wear it for a few minutes before they wrest it away from me. The SDK will be coming soon. And as Anna spoke, of course, this will be available on our developer portal, developer.samsung.com. And I'd actually like to highlight a few partners that have already been working on the Fit. So here, of course, we love working with eBay. And I think Curtis gave that nice use case earlier of you know, the bidding with your device. And so again, you know, you can tell from these partners they're not all fitness partners or things like that. So I really want to inspire people to take away the idea that this device, you look at the screen, you can actually do some really interesting things on it in combination with other applications. It's going to be a new way of interacting. It's going to be an exciting thing, I think, and something to think about going forward, that you don't just consider it fitness. You know, everybody's showing the graphs of how fitness is going to explode. Well, this can allow all sorts of applications to explode. And I think that's what's going to set this apart from a lot of other things that are out there right now. So thank you very much for coming and listening to our talks.